Today we come to the great King David, and I mean great in every sense of the word. You could hold him up next to Churchill or Lincoln or anyone else you can think of, and he would comfortably hold his own. David gives us an unparalleled picture of what is possible when a flesh and blood human being engages with the living God. And he was a flesh and blood human being. In this study, we're going to fly over the last 16 chapters of 1 Samuel, and we're going to look for character traits of David that we could put in his testimonial. They're all highly positive. I know that there's negative later on, and we'll deal with that later on. But the purpose of this study is to marvel at what is possible when a human being has a relationship with the living God. So join me on our flying visit. Before we even meet David, Samuel says to Saul, "The Lord has rejected you and chosen a man after his own heart." I believe that David was a man after God's own heart. Even during his fallen phase, God looks on the heart, and that's what really matters. And so Samuel goes down to Bethlehem, and Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel asked in one of the more amusing sentences of the Bible, "Are these all the sons you have?" And Jesse answered, "There is still the youngest. He is tending the sheep." David, from the beginning, was humble and willing to engage in menial work. So Samuel anointed David, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. David was chosen, he was anointed by God, and David was filled with the Holy Spirit. Well, as it happened, Saul got David to come and play the lyre for him. Whenever the evil spirit came on Saul, David would play. Then relief would come to Saul, and he would feel better. David had a calming spirit, and he was a gifted musician. Did you know that Bill Clinton and Harry Truman, presidents of the United States, were both concert-level musicians? So was David. Well, now we come to the great story of David and Goliath. David comes down there, and he gets before Saul, and he says, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go out and fight him." A young man of tremendous courage and bravery. And also notice, a servant spirit. And he reassures Saul. He says, "Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear with his bare hands." Therefore, I believe, as I said before, he was a big, strapping, strong young man. And he goes on to say to Saul, "The Lord who rescued me from the lion and the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." He has a remarkable faith for a young man. Or perhaps it's easier for a young man, I don't know. But he also has a sense of God's constant presence in his life. Even as he's dealing with this lion and the bear, he's aware of the Lord present in his life, the secret of the spiritual life. And then David went down and he said to Goliath, "I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." He has a remarkably high view of God as Almighty for such a young man. And he has a strong sense that Israel is God's chosen people, not to be messed with. And I think I sense a tinge of jealousy for God in this. How dare you defy the army of the living God? By the way, do you know what was wrong with Goliath? They put this question to the students in the medical school at Wits University to test their ability in diagnosis. Goliath had an enlarged pituitary gland, which manifests itself in giantism and in a softening and thinning of the bones of the skull. So the stone sank right into his forehead. Well, because David killed Goliath, Saul offered him one of his daughters in marriage, and David said to Saul, "Who am I that I should become the king's son-in-law?" There is the humility again, not seeking a privileged position. And from that time on, whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army, and this pleased all the troops. He was competent to hold high rank. He was destined for greatness. And notice that he was greatly admired by his men. And then we read that one of Saul's other daughters, Michal, was in love with David. I will simply put here that he was attractive to women. We know that that's going to lead to trouble. But nevertheless, he was a very attractive man. And then we come to the delightful story of the friendship of David and Jonathan. And we read Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. David was capable of engendering deep affection in other people, and he was capable himself of engaging in deep relationships. He was also capable of making deep commitment, a covenant commitment, and sticking to it. And then when David and Jonathan bid one another a very sad farewell, they'll never see each other again, David bowed down before Jonathan 3 times with his face to the ground. He's deeply respectful of Jonathan's role and position as the crown prince, and I see no hint of jealousy in him that Jonathan might become king and not him. And so David begins his long exile in the desert, and he comes to Ahimelech, the priest, and he asks for food. And Ahimelech says, "If your men have kept from women, I can give you yesterday's consecrated bread." And David says, "Indeed, women have been kept from us as usual. The men's bodies are holy." David is capable of sexual purity and control. Again, we know that will fall at one stage, but by and large, he was a sexually pure person. Well, the vengeful Saul came hunting for David, and he came to Ahimelech and asked him where David had gone. And Ahimelech says to him, "Why do you want to kill him? Who of all your servants is as loyal as David?" An intensely loyal person, even to someone who really didn't deserve it. But the vicious Saul killed Ahimelech and most of his family for helping David. Then David said to the son of Ahimelech who had survived, "I am responsible for the death of your whole family. Come with me and I will keep you safe." A man capable of taking responsibility and the consequences of his own actions. Well, at one stage in his desert wanderings, David was near the crags of the wild goats in the desert of En-Gedi. Now, I have been to En-Gedi, and I can assure you it's very craggy and rugged and uninviting. And by the way, the wild goats are still there after all these years. David spent years in this arid, awful desert. He was highly resourceful and skilled in the craft of survival in the desert. Now, when we were there, we took a picture of this cave, and I just wondered, is that perhaps the cave where Saul went in to have a sleep? And David crept up unnoticed and cut off the corner of Saul's robe. His men were urging him to kill Saul, but he didn't. He was merciful. But afterwards, David was conscience-stricken for even having cut off a corner of his robe. He said, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to the Lord's anointed." David had an acute conscience, which actually was to be his saving later on. And he had an acute sense of the holiness of the Lord's anointed, however he was behaving. He actually used this sentence 9 times. And then the delightful story of Abigail and Nabal. Now, Nabal means fool. I don't know what parents give their children that name, but it proved prophetic. David had been protecting the area for years, and then he came to Nabal for food, and he said, "Long life to you, good health to you and your household, good health to all that is yours." David was very courteous and polite in asking for that food. But Nabal refused to give it to him. And so David set out to come and kill Nabal and take vengeance. But Abigail, whom we're told was beautiful and intelligent, what more do you want, said to David, "Please pay no attention to that fool, then you will not have the blood of vengeance on your conscience." David was capable of receiving correction, and because of it, he preserved his reputation as a non-vengeful person. A little later, there came an argument in battle over who was looking after the stuff and who was fighting the battle, and David made this ruling: the share of the men who stayed with the supplies is to be the same as those who went into battle. All will share alike. A very equitable person. And so we have 34 character traits, and there are lots more we could have taken. A remarkable picture of what is possible when a human being engages in relationship with the living God. But I want to give you one more. Do you recognize these words? The Lord is my shepherd. David was a world-class poet. I wonder if anyone has ever written words that have been so much comfort to so many people for so many centuries as these.
The Lord's my shepherd, but I'll not want. He makes me lie in pastures green. He leads me by the still, still waters. Your goodness will lead